Have you ever felt like life was moving too fast, yet at the same time slipping through your fingers like grains of sand? One moment, you are surrounded by people, responsibilities, and purpose, and the next, you find yourself sitting in a quiet house, wondering where all the years have gone. Thomas knew this feeling well. At 72, he had lived a full life. A devoted husband, a respected teacher, a father who had done his best. But now, with his wife gone and his children wrapped up in their own busy lives, the silence around him had grown unbearable. It was not just the absence of voices, it was the absence of meaning. The long days stretched endlessly before him, and for the first time he found himself asking, "What now?" One afternoon, while sifting through old photographs, he came across a picture that had been buried beneath stacks of forgotten memories. It was a simple image. He and his wife, decades ago, standing beneath the towering trees of an ancient forest. He could almost hear her laughter, feel the warmth of her hand in his. They had promised to return when they were older, when life had slowed down, when there would be time to simply be. But time, as it often does, had moved in unpredictable ways, leaving behind only unfulfilled promises and distant echoes of what once was. The next morning, without overthinking, he packed a small bag and set out toward the very forest in the photograph. He told himself it was just a walk, just a chance to breathe fresh air, but deep down, he knew he was searching for something more. Maybe peace, maybe clarity, maybe just a sense that he still belonged somewhere. As he stepped into the quiet embrace of the trees, the weight of his loneliness seemed to lessen, if only slightly. The forest did not ask anything of him, it simply existed, unwavering, constant. But nature has a way of challenging us just as much as it comforts us. What Thomas did not know was that a storm was approaching, one that would not only test his body but his spirit. As the wind began to shift and the sky darkened, he found himself further from the path than he had intended. The forest, which had moments ago felt like a sanctuary, now loomed around him like an unfamiliar world. He was alone, truly alone, with no choice but to face himself in a way he never had before. What do we do when life leads us somewhere we did not expect? When we are lost, not just in the world, but within ourselves? Thomas was about to find out. Chapter 1. Thomas and the Loneliness of Old Age. Thomas had never feared silence before. As a professor of philosophy, he had spent decades teaching his students about the beauty of solitude, the richness of contemplation, the importance of slowing down. He had believed in those words once. But now, sitting alone in his dimly lit house, silence was no longer a companion. It was a weight pressing down on his chest. It filled the empty rooms where laughter had once echoed, stretched across the long afternoons where no one came to visit, settled into the spaces where conversations used to flow effortlessly. He had always imagined old age as a time of peace, a well-earned retreat from the demands of life. But no one had warned him about the loneliness, about the way time could feel like an endless stretch of emptiness when there was no one left to share it with. For years, his life had been full. There was always someone who needed him, his students, his colleagues, his children, and above all, his wife, Margaret. She had been the heart of his world, the steady force that made everything feel right. They had built a life together. One, filled with quiet joys and deep conversations, with road trips and Sunday morning coffee, with a love that had been more about presence than grand gestures. And then one day, she was gone. It had been 2 years, but grief did not follow the rules of time. It did not lessen just because the calendar pages had turned. His children had done their best to check in, but they had their own lives, their own families, their own worries. He never wanted to be a burden, so he learned to say he was fine, even when he wasn't. He had tried to fill his days with books and small routines, morning walks, tending to the small garden Margaret had loved, sitting by the window with a cup of tea as the sun faded. But no matter what he did, there was a quiet ache that would not leave him, a question that would not stop whispering in his mind. What was he supposed to do with the rest of his life? That question followed him one afternoon as he sorted through, old belongings moving slowly through the past, touching each memory with reverence. And then, buried beneath stacks of papers, he found it, the photograph. He and Margaret standing beneath a canopy of towering trees, their hands intertwined, their smiles effortless. The memory came rushing back. That trip had been years ago, before the illnesses, before the losses, before time had started taking more than it gave. He could still hear her voice, light and teasing. "When we're old, we'll come back here and just listen to the wind, just let it all be." He traced his fingers over the faded edges of the photograph, something stirring, deep within him. The house suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too distant from the world outside. He stood up, and before he could talk himself out of it, he made a decision. He would go back. He would take that walk, not for the past, not to chase what was, gone, but to see if there was still something waiting for him in the spaces between the trees, in the silence that no longer had to feel empty. Chapter 2. The silence of the forest and recent memories. The moment Thomas stepped into the forest, the world outside seemed to disappear. The distant hum of cars, the weight of time, the echo of an empty house, all of it faded into the background, as the trees welcomed him into their quiet sanctuary. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, fresh and untouched, as if it belonged to a time before the world became too fast, too loud. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening. There it was, the soft rustling of leaves in the wind, the rhythmic chirping of crickets, the distant murmur of a stream hidden beyond the trees. It was not silence, not really. It was a different kind of presence, one that did not demand anything of him, one that simply was. He walked slowly, letting the path guide him rather than forcing a destination. With each step, memories began to surface, carried by the whispers of the trees. He saw himself as a young man, hiking this very trail with Margaret, her laughter blending with the sound of birds overhead. She had always moved through the world, with an effortless grace, as if she belonged everywhere. She had picked up fallen leaves, tracing their delicate veins with her fingertips, marveling at the simple beauty of nature. "Everything here is alive, Thomas," she had told him, "even the things that look still." That thought lingered now as he moved deeper into the forest. He reached out and touched the rough bark of a towering oak, felt the cool dampness of moss beneath his fingertips. Even after standing for decades, the tree remained steady, growing, changing, existing. It had seen seasons come and go, leaves fall and return, storms pass and skies clear. It had lost branches and grown new ones. And yet, it stood, unshaken, by the impermanence of it all. There was a lesson in that, though Thomas was not sure he was ready to understand it just yet. He continued walking, his mind drifting between past and present. The dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves reminded him of afternoons spent lying in the grass with Margaret, watching the patterns of light dance on their skin. The distant trickle of the stream brought back memories of their quiet conversations, of shared silences that had never felt uncomfortable. There had been a time when just being together had been enough, when peace had not been something to chase but something they simply allowed themselves to feel. But could peace still find him? Now, in the absence of everything he once knew, he wanted to believe it could. The forest seemed to tell him that nothing was ever truly lost, that just as the trees shed their leaves without fear, He too could let go of the weight he had been carrying. He took a deep breath, allowing the cool air to fill his lungs. For the first time in a long time, he felt the beginnings of something unfamiliar yet comforting. Not joy, not quite yet, but maybe, just maybe, the possibility of it. Chapter 3. The Lesson of Impermanence from the Trees. As Thomas walked deeper into the forest, he found himself drawn to a towering oak standing alone in a small clearing. It was massive, its roots sprawling beneath the earth like the veins of an ancient being, its branches stretching high, reaching for the sky. Some of its limbs were thick and strong, adorned with leaves that whispered in the wind. Others were bare, broken from storms long past, their jagged edges a quiet testament to time's relentless passage. The tree had endured, bending, growing, shedding, and standing still through the years. Thomas traced his fingers along its bark, feeling the rough texture beneath his skin. How many storms had this tree weathered? How many seasons had it witnessed? How many times had it let go of its leaves only to grow new ones again? There was something humbling about it, something that made him feel both small and deeply connected to everything around him. Margaret had always loved trees. She would stop in the middle of trails just to admire their branches, pointing out the ones that had survived lightning strikes, the ones that stood despite their hollowed trunks. "They don't resist, Thomas," she would say. "They just let go and begin again." He took a step back, looking at the ground beneath him. Leaves lay scattered across the earth, golden and crisp, forming a soft, rustling carpet under his boots. Not long ago, they had been green, vibrant, full of life. Now they returned to the soil, feeding the roots of the very tree that had released them. There was no resistance, no fear, no mourning of what once was, just a natural cycle, an acceptance of change. The tree did not fight the seasons. It embraced them. It let go when it was time, trusting that new leaves would come again. Thomas exhaled, feeling something shift within him. He had spent so much of his life holding on, to the past, to the idea of who he used to be, to the weight of things he could no longer change. He had resisted time, fought against the inevitable losses, tried to anchor himself in memories that, no matter how beautiful, could not bring back what was gone. But standing here, in the presence of something so much older and wiser than him, he wondered if he had been doing it all wrong. Maybe the key was not in clinging, but in allowing. Maybe peace was not found in trying to keep things as they were, but in learning to let them transform. A gust of wind blew through the clearing, sending a few remaining leaves fluttering from the branches. They spiraled gently to the ground, weightless, unburdened. Thomas watched them fall, and for the first time he did not feel sadness. Instead, he felt something closer to understanding. The tree would lose its leaves, and then, in time, it would grow new ones. So would he. Chapter 4. The Lesson of the River. Acceptance and change, Thomas continued walking, his thoughts lingering on the lesson the oak tree had silently taught him. The forest path narrowed, leading him toward the sound of rushing water. As he approached, a small river came into view, winding its way through the trees like a silver ribbon. The water moved effortlessly, flowing around rocks, over fallen branches, carving its way through the land without hesitation. It did not resist. It simply moved forward. He knelt by the edge, dipping his fingers into the cool water. The current slipped past his skin, smooth and constant, unbothered by the obstacles in its path. He watched as fallen leaves floated by, spinning and twirling in the gentle waves, never fighting where they were taken. The river did not cling to them, nor did the leaves resist the current. They accepted their journey, wherever it led. Thomas thought about how much of his life had been spent resisting change. He had built his world around structure and understanding, believing that if he planned carefully enough, if he held on to things tightly enough, he could keep life from shifting beneath him. But life had moved anyway. It had taken Margaret, it had taken his sense of purpose, it had left him standing in a house that no longer felt like home. And instead of flowing with it, he had fought against it. He had tried to hold on to the past, to make sense of the emptiness, to resist the reality that everything had changed. A sudden gust of wind sent ripples across the water, distorting the reflection of the trees above. He saw himself in the broken patterns, shifting and uncertain, and for the first time he did not try to fix it. He simply watched as the river carried the broken images away, smoothing itself out again, always returning to a state of calm. Perhaps he could do the same. Perhaps life was not about clinging to what was, but about moving with what is. He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. It disappeared beneath the surface with a soft plunk, sending ripples outward in perfect circles. The river did not hold on to the disturbance. It did not resist the interruption. It simply absorbed it and kept flowing. The realization settled, deep within him. Life would continue to change. It would bring loss, uncertainty, moments of stillness and storms alike. But just as the river did not resist its course, neither did it fear where it was going. Thomas exhaled, letting go of a breath he had been holding for far too long. He closed his eyes and listened to the steady rhythm of the water, allowing it to teach him what he had refused to learn before. He did not need all the answers. He did not need to fight the current. He simply needed to trust that he too would find his way, one moment at a time, just like the river. Chapter 5. The Value of the Present. Awakening in the Sunset. The sun hung low in the sky as Thomas made his way up a small hill, his breath steady, his steps unhurried. The golden light of evening stretched across the treetops, casting long shadows that moved gently with the wind. He reached a clearing where a single, smooth rock sat at the edge of the hill, overlooking the vast expanse of forest below. It was the perfect place to rest. Lowering himself onto the cool stone, he exhaled, feeling the weight of the day settle around him like a warm embrace. Before him, the sky was alive with color, deep oranges melting into soft pinks, purples fading into the quiet blue of the approaching night. The sun, once high and unshaken, now dipped slowly toward the horizon. There was no resistance, no hesitation, only the quiet surrender to the inevitable passage of time. He had watched countless sunsets in his life, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it was not just the sky that was changing, he was changing too. For so long he had lived either in the past or in an uncertain future. His days had been filled with memories that clung to him like old shadows, regrets about what he could have done differently, fears about the years ahead. But now, sitting in the presence of something so simple yet so profound, he felt all of those thoughts begin to loosen their grip. The past had already played its part, and the future would come whether he was ready or not. The only thing that was real, the only thing that had ever truly mattered, was this moment. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it the distant scent of pine and earth. Somewhere nearby, a bird called out, its song drifting through the evening air. Everything was still, yet everything was alive. He felt the cool stone beneath his palms, the fading warmth of the sun on his face, the steady rhythm of his own breathing. How many moments like this had passed him by, unnoticed? How many times had he rushed through life, believing that meaning lay in the next destination rather than in the journey itself? The sun inched lower, touching the horizon in a final, quiet farewell. Thomas watched as it sank without struggle, without fear, knowing it would rise again when the time was right. He closed his eyes, feeling a peace he had not known in years settle within him. If the sun could set in perfect acceptance, then so could he. Life was not meant to be held on to, nor was it meant to be feared. It was meant to be lived, moment by moment, fully and without regret. As darkness slowly embraced the forest, Thomas stood stretching his tired limbs. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he was no longer afraid. He had spent so much of his life searching for meaning, for answers, for a way to make sense of everything. But here, in the fading light of day, he understood something far greater. Peace was never something to be found. It was something to be lived. Chapter 6. Return. Nature is the great teacher, the greatest. The morning air was crisp as Thomas began his journey back. The forest, which had once seemed vast and unfamiliar, now felt like an old friend, its quiet presence comforting rather than overwhelming. The path beneath his feet was the same one he had walked the day before, yet somehow everything felt different. The trees still stood tall, the river still flowed, the wind still carried whispers through the leaves, but something inside him had shifted. He was not leaving as the same man who had arrived. He moved slowly, taking in the details he had overlooked before, the way the light filtered through the branches, the way the earth felt solid beneath his step, the way each bird call seemed to weave into the silence rather than break it. There was a harmony to it all, a rhythm he had failed to notice in his restlessness. Nature was never in a hurry, yet everything happened exactly as it was meant to. The trees did not rush to grow. The river did not force its course. The seasons did not resist their change. Everything simply was. He had spent so much of his life trying to control, to understand, to fight against the things he could not change. But here, among the quiet wisdom of the forest, he saw how futile that had been. The greatest peace was not found in holding on, but in letting go. The house came into view just as the morning sun began to warm the horizon. It was the same house he had left, standing just as he had known it, yet it no longer felt like a place of isolation. It was not the walls or the furniture that had made it feel empty before. It was him. He had carried his grief, his longing, his fears like heavy stones, and now he felt lighter. The house had not changed, but he had. Stepping onto the porch, he placed his hand on the doorframe, pausing for a moment before stepping inside. He no longer feared the quiet. He no longer saw the stillness as emptiness. The house was simply waiting, just as the forest had waited, just as life had always waited for him to be present. He moved through the rooms with a newfound awareness, noticing the simple beauty in the way the morning light stretched across the wooden floors, the way the air smelled faintly of tea leaves and old books. Everything felt softer, as if the world itself had exhaled. Later that afternoon, he stepped into the small garden Margaret had once tended. The soil was dry, the plants overgrown, but there was life beneath it all, waiting for care. He knelt down, running his fingers through the earth, and without hesitation, he began to clear the weeds. He did not know how long he stayed there, only that with each movement, with each handful of earth turned over, he was not just tending the garden, he was tending to himself. As the sun began its descent, he placed a single seed into the soil, covering it gently. It would take time, patience, and trust, but he knew now that life had its own way of unfolding. The forest had taught him that. The river had shown him that. The sky had whispered it to him. Nature had been his greatest teacher, and for the first time in a long time, he was ready to listen. As the days passed, Thomas found himself moving through life with a different rhythm. The world had not changed, but the way he saw it had. He no longer rushed through his mornings, no longer filled his days with distractions to avoid the silence. Instead, he welcomed it. He let the quiet settle around him like an old friend, no longer something to fear but something to embrace. The wind still whispered through the trees, the river still carved its path through the land, and the sun still rose and set with unwavering certainty. But now he understood that these things were not just part of the background. They were lessons, reminders that life was always moving, always changing, always offering new beginnings. There had been a time when he thought peace was something distant, something to be found in the next achievement, the next chapter, the next destination. But the forest had taught him otherwise. Peace was not something outside of him, waiting to be discovered. It was something within, something that had been there all along, beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the weight of all the things he had carried for too long. He had spent so many years searching for answers, only to realize that the greatest wisdom was not in knowing, but in being. Perhaps you, too, have felt lost at times, caught between what was and what will be. Perhaps you have held on to the past, afraid to let go, unsure of what remains. But just as the trees do not resist the seasons, just as the river does not fight its course, we too can learn to move with life instead of against it. We can learn to trust that even in loss, even in change, there is growth waiting beneath the surface, and in that growth there is peace. If this story has resonated with you, I invite you to take a moment to step outside. Feel the air on your skin. Listen to the rustling of the leaves. Watch the sky shift from one color to the next. Nature is always there, waiting for us to notice, waiting for us to remember that we, too, are part of something vast and beautiful. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to rush. You only need to be present. If this journey has meant something to you, consider staying with us as we continue to explore the wisdom of nature and the lessons it offers. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and let's walk this path together. After all, like the trees, like the river, like the setting sun, we are all connected. And in that connection, we find our way home.